Capcom, one of the greats, almost went bankrupt. Not once, not twice, but 3 times in their first decade. And each failure accidentally built one of the greatest gaming studios in history. One of my favorite game studios since I was a little owl. The first Capcom game I remember playing is probably Mega Man Legends on my PS1. I know it isn't much now, but this game was mind-blowing when I was like 8. The open world, the freedom, the combat, cool designs, and oh my god, I can even kick a can. This blew me away as a kid, and when I got Mega Man Zero on the Game Boy Advance, this game was the coolest 2D game I had ever had in my hands. Slicing through enemies with the Z-Saber, watch them split in half slowly like a cool anime samurai was peak action for my child brain, waiting for my grandmother to get out the tanning bed while I waited in the lobby. I don't think at this time I knew who Capcom was yet, and they wouldn't stick with me until my friend in high school, shout out to you Ariel, told me to play a little game called Devil May Cry 3. Sounds lame, dude. Devil's crying? I responded in the lunchroom, but his face had a serious expression as he said, "No, really, you need to play this." He pulled the game out of his backpack and he said, "You can borrow it." I was 14 at the time. I don't think I got past original level 7 on Son of Sparta, but I was still hooked. That was the moment Capcom went from a name on a game box to a studio I actually cared about. Let's talk about how they got here. Now, when doing research on this video, I remember that Capcom has a complete timeline on their website. And if that kind of nerdy stuff is cool to you, go check out that sometime as well. On May 30th, 1979, the IRM Corporation was formed in Matsubara, Osaka. Kenzo Sugimoto. Now, I could not for the life of me find what IRM stood for, but Mr. Sugimoto was already the president of the IREM Corporation, which, from what I have found, stood for International Rental Electronics Machines. Considering that IRM was doing a similar thing, it probably means something along the lines of International Rental Machines. 2 years later, in May, the subsidiary Japan Capsule Computer Company would be born. And in case you didn't know, yes, Capcom stands for Capsule Computers. Now, despite how cool that sounds, it sadly is not a computer the size of a pill that Capcom figured out how to do in 1980. It was instead a way to describe their arcade machines as a capsule packed to the brim with fun. Some people say the hard outer shell on the computer was a metaphor for the capsule itself as well. Now, in September 1981, they changed the name again from IRM to Sanbico, including the subsidiaries. Now, between 1981 and 1983, I'm not really sure what Sanbi did. There's a lot of information is online, and most of it is a bullet point on Capcom's website. And around this time, I spent way too long Googling Sanbi, only to find out that the South African National Biodiversity Institute has since claimed the name. Not very helpful. All of this was just to set the groundwork for the big day. June 11th, 1983, Sugimoto would officially establish Capcom to handle the internal sales department for the company. In 1983, they would release their first coin-operated machine called Little League, and a few others that year as well. Capcom saw the arcade boom of the time and knew there was opportunity. Initially, they were going to sell software exclusively, but in 1984 they would release their first arcade game titled Vulgus. Vulgus was a vertical scrolling shooter, not unlike many other known today like Ikaruga, but far less advanced. You had infinite ammo, but not so infinite lives and definitely not infinite bombs. And you could put in more coins to continue if you died, of course. Now, obviously, I don't have the coin sales data, but from what I saw online, Vulgus was a hit in Japan in 1984, being one of the most popular arcade games in Japan, and would establish the later 1942 series for Capcom in December of that year. 1 year later, in 1985, Capcom would establish Capcom USA in California to distribute games in the US, and they'd release the game Commando and the gruelingly difficult banger Ghosts and Goblins, which probably took a solid grand to beat on a first run using quarters. In December that year, they released their very first home video game on the NES, 1942. Having an arcade game this fun at home must have been incredible back in the day. If you weren't already playing Mario, then this must have been the jam. The next year, in '86, Capcom would port Commando and Ghosts and Goblins to home consoles, and that way you could suffer alone instead of in the arcade. So Capcom has hits in the arcade, hits in the home, is overall starting off strong in the industry. At this point, nothing could stop them, right? Right? August 12th, 1987. Capcom, well, not a big deal at the time, would release a little game called Street Fighter. Originally, they released it with only a 4-button cabinet. And when I say 4 buttons, I don't mean like light, medium, heavy, special, and a joystick. No, there were 4 big buttons, 2 red, 2 blue, 2 joysticks. You could punch or kick with 3 different strengths depending on how hard you hit the button. This was not initially a success. People reported injuries and broken machines from hitting them too hard. Not really the greatest idea, but hindsight's 2020. And I can see how the fun factor is there in this novel idea. That being said, people didn't really agree, and this initial arcade cabinet didn't do well, selling reportedly around 100 cabinets. Now, Capcom would reinvent this idea with the traditional 6-button layout that we all know and love today. 3 kicks, 3 punches, and this version sold over 100,000 cabinets, becoming the #1 arcade game in Japan by January of 1988. Now, in America, people love to roast this game, and I mean, just look at it. But consider what fighting games looked like at the time, like karate, kung fu on the NES. And you'll develop a bit more appreciation for this title. Am I gonna go play it later? No. But that doesn't mean the art shouldn't be respected. That being said, it didn't do as well in the USA, peaking at number 10 in December 1987. And speaking of December 1987, on the 17th that year, Mega Man would release in America on the NES, or as you would call it, Rockman in Japan on the Famicom. While famous now, the original Mega Man didn't do that well, and when pressing for a sequel, Inafune initially got rejected due to poor sales. Being one of the greats as he is though, he knew he had a hit and just made the sequel anyway on a shoestring budget with a small team. Mega Man 2 is a huge success. But that's for a later time. Someone who's played the original Mega Man, it is pretty tough, and I can see a lot of kids not pushing through it. There are over 50 Mega Man games, and while not active very much right now, a new game was just announced not too long ago, and it's slated for a 2027 release date. Now we skip ahead to 1989, where 2 pretty big things happened. Sanbi would officially change their corporate name to Capcom, like we all know and love today, and then on the 25th of '89, Capcom would release Final Fight. My favorite fun fact about the series is that the late great legend himself, Robin Williams' youngest son, is named Cody Williams, and Robin did confirm he's named after a video game character. Many people speculate this is Cody from Final Fight. I lean towards believing this for a few reasons. Number 1, Robin Williams already named a daughter after Zelda. There's even that famous commercial with both of them in it. It will just melt your heart if you haven't seen it. 2, his son was born in 1991, and the game was released 2 years prior. It is very believable that avid gamer Robin Williams still had the game on his mind. And lastly, I can't even think of any other famous gaming Codys off the top of my head. And I mean like right now in 2026, not in 1991. That's way less likely. But if you could think of any from before 91 that actually might be the one his son is named after, go ahead and comment it down below, because I really can't think of any famous Codys. Final Fight did pretty well and had a solid fan base today. People are still hoping for a series revival. So that company that almost sank itself multiple times, by 1989 they had Street Fighter on its way to becoming the biggest fighting game franchise ever, Mega Man was a franchise despite being rejected, and Final Fight was already inspiring legends. The 80s almost broke Capcom and doomed them to the pachinko machine graveyard, but instead they would change the industry for the better. Most of the time. The 90s are where things get really crazy for Capcom and things start taking off. Street Fighter 2 would revolutionize the genre, Resident Evil and Dino Crisis would scare us senseless and bring zombies into the zeitgeist harder than Dawn of the Dead, and Mega Man X would be one of the biggest blue gaming mascots out there. Go ahead and like the video, subscribe so you don't miss that next one, and drop a comment. What's your first Capcom memory? Mine was getting crushed in that stage with the falling platforms in Mega Man 1.